It started like any other birthday morning at Brookstone Elementary. Paper streamers curled from the classroom lights, third graders buzzed with sugar anticipation, and Mrs. Carmichael, always the kind of teacher who made holidays feel magical, had just pulled out the birthday crown. At the center of the table, a cake sat like a trophy. Thick blue and green frosting swirled around plastic dinosaurs mid-roar. It was Eli Morgan's first birthday at his new school in northern New Hampshire. 9 years old, polite to a fault, but wary. He smiled when expected, nodded when spoken to, and always kept his hands folded neatly on his desk. He had the kind of stillness most adults mistook for shyness. But Officer Avery Jensen knew better. She'd seen that look before, in kids who had learned to read danger before they ever learned to ride a bike. And Rex saw it too. The German Shepherd, her canine partner of 6 years, was lying near the back cubbies, his vest loose but his posture alert. The moment the cake entered the room, Rex lifted his head. Then he growled. Not a bark. Not curiosity. A low, guttural sound that came from deep inside his chest. Mrs. Carmichael paused, chalk in hand. Avery, your partner's acting a little intense this morning. Avery's hand instinctively brushed the leash clipped to her belt. Rex had never growled in a classroom before, never lunged, never reacted unless there was something real. He stood. The cake had been dropped off earlier that morning by a man who introduced himself as Eli's uncle, Rick Vega. Tall, sunglasses never came off, a forced grin stretched too wide. He hadn't said much, just placed the cake on the table and left. Now Rex was moving. Deliberate. Tail stiff. Nose up. He wasn't looking at the kids. He was locked on the cake. Avery moved too. Let's just give Rex a moment, she said calmly, but her other hand had already radioed the front office for backup. One of the aides laughed. Maybe he just wants a slice. Rex let out a sharp bark that made half the room flinch. Eli didn't flinch. He stepped back, eyes locked on the cake like he'd seen this before. Avery crouched beside him. Eli, is something wrong with the cake? He hesitated. My uncle said not to eat it, he whispered. Just pretend. He said if I said anything, he'd make my mom disappear again. Avery's breath caught in her throat. Rex barked again, louder this time. Everyone, out! Avery ordered. Mrs. Carmichael didn't hesitate. She corralled the kids toward the hallway. But Eli wouldn't move. You're safe now, Avery told him. Rex and I, we've got you. He nodded once, solemn. The kind of nod that felt older than any 9-year-old should ever give. The school went into a soft lockdown. By the time the bomb squad arrived, Avery and Rex were still watching the cake. Rex never took his eyes off it. A mobile scanner showed something buried deep under the thick sponge. A dense metal shape. Inside the cake, inside a sealed food-grade container, was a loaded Sig Sauer pistol. No fingerprints, no serial number. Taped to the underside of the box with surgical precision. Who the hell bakes a gun into a kid's cake? One officer muttered. Avery already knew the answer. Rick Vega wasn't Eli's uncle. He was a known associate of a trafficking ring tied to a federal investigation out of Boston. Rachel Morgan, Eli's mother, had been slated to testify against Vega's crew 11 months earlier. Then she vanished. No note, no trace, no body. Until now. Eli was placed under protective watch immediately. Avery stayed with him in the back of the squad vehicle, while Rex pressed his head gently into the boy's lap. You knew something was wrong, she said. Eli nodded. My mom told me, if anything ever happened, to find a dog like Rex. She said, they don't lie. Outside the school, news vans were lining up. Inside, officers processed evidence while Rex stood watch. Avery scratched behind his ears. "You saved them all. You know that," she whispered. Rex huffed softly, not breaking eye contact with the hallway. But Avery wasn't breathing easy yet. She'd seen too much to believe this was over. A gun in a birthday cake wasn't a threat. It was a message. And messages like that meant someone was still coming. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and cheap lavender. Eli sat on the edge of the cot, his feet dangling just above the tile floor, gripping a juice box like it was the only solid thing in his life. He hadn't said a word since the ride over, not to the trauma counselor, not to the nurse, not even to Avery, except to Rex. The German shepherd sat calmly by the door, ears tilted forward, body relaxed but alert. Eli had reached out the moment they entered and placed a small, trembling hand on Rex's back. He hadn't moved it since. Avery sat in the chair opposite, watching the boy, not studying, not pressuring, just being there. Finally, Eli spoke, almost too quietly to hear. "I knew he'd come." Avery leaned forward. "Rex?" Eli nodded. "I just didn't know if he'd be in time." Silence pressed against the windows. The sounds of a TV from the waiting room filtered in and out, some late-morning news anchor talking about rising gun violence and school security. Same noise as always. But here, inside this little room, something was shifting. "You said your uncle told you not to eat the cake," Avery said, voice careful. "Can you tell me more about that?" Eli swallowed. His eyes were glassy, tired. "He said it was from him, but it wasn't. He said to pretend." "Did he say why?" "If I said anything, he said my mom would disappear." Again. That word, again. It landed heavy in Avery's chest. "Eli, where is your mom?" He stared down at his juice box, then at Rex. "I think she's hiding. From them. She said, if something ever happened, to find a good dog. One who listens." Rex let out a soft exhale, through his nose, shifting just enough to press closer to Eli's leg. Avery didn't say anything for a moment. Then she stood, stepped outside, and called into the precinct. "Run everything we have on Rachel Morgan. Resurface every buried case file, including the feds." The dispatcher hesitated. "I thought she was presumed dead." "Presumed," Avery snapped. "Not confirmed. Get me everything." By afternoon, Child Protective Services had moved Eli into a temporary foster placement, licensed, clean, within the county. Avery pulled up in an unmarked SUV, Rex in the back seat, watching the world like he was waiting for the wrong person to walk by. Eli stood at the front steps of the foster house, holding a peanut butter sandwich he wasn't eating. The moment the SUV pulled in, he lit up. Not with joy, but with recognition. Like he'd been holding his breath all day, waiting to exhale. "Rex," he said. The dog jumped out the moment Avery opened the door and trotted straight to him. Eli dropped to his knees, arms wrapping around Rex's thick neck. The foster mom stood on the porch, eyes soft but wary. "He hasn't said much since he got here. He doesn't need to," Avery said. "Rex will do the talking." They sat on the porch for a while. Late afternoon sun filtered through the trees. Birds chirped like the world hadn't almost ended that morning. "You hungry?" Avery asked. Eli shook his head. "I'm always hungry. Doesn't mean I want to eat." "Fair enough." He traced his fingers along Rex's back. "Did you arrest him?" he asked. "Rick Vega. We're working on it. He disappeared right after the drop. We're tracking everything he touched." Eli didn't look surprised. "He's not my uncle. Not really." "I know," Avery said. Then quietly he added, "I know where my mom is." Avery froze. "You do?" He nodded. She's in Vermont, up in the woods. She said she'd stay there until she knew it was safe. Did she tell you that recently? No. He looked at Rex. I told him. Avery blinked. You told... Rex? Eli nodded again. He knows how to listen. Avery didn't press further. She just stared at the boy who had survived something far more calculated than anyone had guessed. A child used as bait. A cake as a decoy. A missing woman with too much to say, and a dog who had refused to stay quiet. That night, Avery drove to the precinct and sat with Captain Cole Harris and a federal marshal named Lindstrom. I want you to reopen Rachel Morgan's file, she said. Eli says she's alive. Based on what? Lindstrom asked, eyebrow raised. Based on instinct, mine and Rex's. Cole leaned forward. You want to chase a ghost based on a kid's gut? No, Avery said. Based on the fact that this kid knew about the gun before anyone else, based on the fact that Vega vanished, based on the fact that nothing about this smells right, and Rex hasn't been wrong once in 6 years. Lindstrom glanced at Rex, who was lying near the door, eyes open, watching everyone. You think Rachel Morgan faked her own disappearance? No, I think she was forced into hiding, and I think someone inside the system helped bury her. 2 days later, the lead came through. A drone surveillance hit matched a woman near a remote cabin outside Montpelier, Vermont. Off-grid. No utilities. But the facial scan was close. Too close to ignore. Avery was in the SUV before the briefing ended. She turned back toward the rear seat. Rex sat there, calm and ready. You up for one more? She asked. He didn't bark. He just stared ahead, as if he already knew where they were going. The road into the Vermont backwoods was barely more than a trail, narrow, unpaved, and half-eaten by snowdrifts. The SUV's tires crunched across frozen gravel as Avery Jensen leaned forward over the wheel, scanning the tree line. She glanced once at the Jeeps. No signal. Of course not. Beside her, Rex stood with his front paws braced on the console, his body tense, eyes fixed forward like he'd already marked something she couldn't see. You smell her, don't you? Avery whispered. Rex didn't move. He didn't need to. The stillness in his body said everything. Federal marshals had pulled satellite frames from a drone sweep, taken by accident during a routine scan of hunting cabins in restricted territory. One of the images caught a woman gathering wood, her hood up, her back turned. At first, no one gave it a second glance. But Avery did. It was the way the woman moved, the slight favoring of her right leg, just like Rachel Morgan's old injury report noted. The profile, blurred but visible, matched a DMV photo that had been pulled from archives nearly a year ago. The theory was simple. Rachel wasn't dead. She was hiding. And she was still trying to protect her son. Avery slowed the SUV and killed the engine a quarter mile from the cabin. Silence settled over the forest like a warning. Rex jumped out first, nose to the air, paws crunching softly over snow. They moved like ghosts. Trained. Quiet. Precise. The cabin emerged through the frost like something out of a forgotten world. One window was patched with cardboard, a thin wisp of smoke drifted from the chimney, and a makeshift antenna hung crooked from the roof. Avery gave Rex the signal. He darted forward, circling wide, then paused at the far corner. One paw lifted, nose twitching. He gave a low, single bark. Target found. Avery moved in, weapon drawn but lowered. Rachel Morgan, she called, voice firm but steady. This is Officer Avery Jensen with the Brookstone PD. I'm not here to hurt you. I have your son. A long pause. Then the door creaked open. A woman stood in the shadows. Pale, underweight, but her eyes, those unmistakable blue eyes, were locked on Avery's. "Where is he?" Rachel asked, her voice raw. "He's safe. Rex and I got to him before anything could happen." Rachel stepped into the light. Her hands trembled at her sides. "Is he okay?" "He misses you," Avery said. "And he never stopped believing you'd come back." Rachel let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. Her knees buckled slightly, but she caught herself. "You can come in," she said. "But the stove's out. It's colder in here than out there." Inside, the cabin was barely livable. Stacked cans, a makeshift cot, papers covered in scribbled notes and names. A battered flip phone lay disassembled on the table. No signals, no GPS, no digital footprint. "He said you vanished," Avery said, glancing around. Rachel sat down hard on a crate. "I had to. Vega's crew was watching everyone. They had someone inside the court. I knew they'd find me if I testified." "You left Eli." "I didn't have a choice," she whispered. "They threatened to take him. I figured if I disappeared, he'd be safe." "He ended up in Vega's house," Avery said, eyes narrowing. Rachel flinched. No, I left him with a neighbor. She promised she'd take him out of state. She never made it." For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then Rex walked over to Rachel and nudged her hand gently. She stared at him. "He's different," she said softly. "He's the reason your son is alive." Rachel didn't respond, but her hand stayed on Rex's fur. Avery stepped toward the table, sifting through Rachel's notes. One name popped up again and again. Marston Fund. A non-profit based in New Hampshire that claimed to support at-risk youth. "They offered to relocate me," Rachel said. "They had documents, plans, even a guardian program for Eli. But something felt off. They knew too much. About my court schedule, my testimony, even what I'd eaten for breakfast that day. So I ran." Avery's gut twisted. She'd heard whispers about the Marston Fund. No one had ever proven anything, but every few months a child in the system would go missing, written off as runaways, forgotten. "What if Vega was just the face?" Avery muttered. "What if he's just the errand boy?" Rachel nodded slowly. "That's what I've been trying to figure out. I think someone higher up is using non-profits like this to move people, disguise the trafficking under adoption, relocation, foster care." Avery looked up. "Do you have proof?" Rachel shook her head. "Not yet, but I have a name." She handed over a torn scrap of paper. On it, a scribbled line. "C. Ross, Internal Coordinator." Avery's stomach dropped. Caleb Ross. A federal tech agent assigned to witness protection logistics. She'd met him once. Charming, quick, sharp with a clipboard and a practiced smile. He was the one who signed off on Eli's cake security form. That wasn't a coincidence. "I need to get you out of here," Avery said, standing. Rachel's eyes flashed with fear. "No. If they see me, they'll come again." "They already are. The cake wasn't just a warning, Rachel. It was a weapon meant for someone in that school. Maybe a teacher. Maybe your son. We don't know yet. But whoever's behind this isn't done." Rachel stood. "Then we move." Outside, the wind had picked up, cold slicing through trees like razors. Rex stood by the vehicle, watching the forest. Avery opened the back door. "Rex, with her," she said. Rex climbed in first. Rachel followed, pausing only once to look back at the cabin. "Will he remember me?" she asked. Avery started the engine. He never forgot. And neither did Rex. The safe house was buried at the end of a dead-end road in rural New Hampshire. a converted ranger station. 2 floors, no neighbors, 1 access point, and security-grade steel doors reinforced after an incident last year. To most, it looked abandoned. To those in the loop, it was where ghosts were kept alive. Rachel Morgan hadn't spoken much since the drive back. She sat in the back seat beside Rex, one hand resting lightly on his shoulders like she was afraid to let go. Her fingers twitched every time a car passed in the opposite direction. Avery parked under the canopy of evergreens and shut off the engine. Rex jumped out first, scanning the perimeter before circling back and sitting at the front step. Waiting. Watching. Inside, agents from the Witness Protection Division were already set up. Marshal Dan Tolan, mid-40s, ex-Navy, and built like an oak tree, was sipping stale coffee from a thermos that had probably seen war. "Perimeter's clean. Scrambled signal. Cameras up. She's clear here," he said, motioning toward Rachel. "Assuming she stays put." "She will," Avery said. "But no one, absolutely no one, gets in without me or Rex." Tolan glanced at the dog. "He always this intense?" "No," Avery replied. "He's usually worse." Rex gave a small huff, like he understood exactly what she said. Inside, Rachel took her first hot shower in weeks. She borrowed sweats from a marshal's bag and ate crackers and cheese in near silence. When she finally spoke, it wasn't to Avery or Tolan. It was to Rex. "They're not just moving people," she said, one hand gripping his collar gently. "They're selling them." Avery looked up from her laptop. "What do you mean?" "I was approached by someone before I vanished. Said they could sponsor me and Eli. All expenses covered. New names, new schools, new jobs. But they wanted paperwork. Proof I had sole custody. No one to look for us." "Did you sign anything?" "No. That's why I ran. They tried to fake the documents anyway." Tolan stepped in. "So you're saying they were setting you up to vanish on paper before they made you vanish in real life?" Rachel nodded. "They've done it before." Avery's phone buzzed. Incoming file from Tech Division. It was surveillance footage from the courthouse 2 months earlier. Caleb Ross, walking out of the witness room. 30 minutes later, the system flagged an unauthorized data pull, Rachel's original relocation request, her address, and internal movement logs. All traced back to Ross's ID. And there it was, a direct link. Avery exhaled through her nose and leaned back in her chair. "He's dirty. And he had access to every protected family in this region." Rachel stood. "Then they'll come again." That night, Avery couldn't sleep. She sat near the back door, eyes locked on the dark woods beyond the porch light. Rex laid at her feet but didn't rest. His head was up, ears twitching every few seconds. Something in the air felt wrong. At 3:17 a.m., Rex stood suddenly, then growled, low, warning. Avery jumped up, weapon drawn. Red emergency lights flared on silently through the trees, motion sensors triggered along the fence. "They're here," she whispered. Rachel bolted from her room. "Where's Eli?" "He's not here, remember? He's still with CPS for safety." Outside, 2 silhouettes broke from the trees. One had bolt cutters. The other was carrying what looked like a cooler, but Avery had seen that trick before. "Breach!" Tolan yelled, storming toward the front hallway. Gunfire cracked through the air. One round hit the siding, sending splinters flying. Rex lunged forward, snarling, and disappeared into the dark. Avery followed. The fight was fast, chaotic, and quiet. Suppressed gunfire. Tactical movement. They weren't amateurs. These men were trained. But they weren't prepared for Rex. He hit the first one mid-run, clamping down on the attacker's arm and dragging him to the ground. The man screamed, then went silent as Rex growled into his neck. The other turned to fire, but dropped the weapon when Avery stepped into the clearing, gun pointed center mass. "Don't move!" He dropped to his knees, hands up. Behind them, red and blue lights flickered through the trees. Backup had arrived. It was over, at least for tonight. By dawn, the safe house was empty. Rachel had been moved again. This time off-grid, even from Avery. She wasn't told the new location. None of them were. "We had a leak," Toland said, "from inside the system." "Ross?" Avery asked. Toland nodded grimly. "Gone. Walked out before we could question him. Left his badge on his desk." Avery crouched beside Rex and scratched behind his ears. "You knew," she whispered. "You always know." Rex didn't move, just kept watching the woods as if danger was still out there, waiting. And it was. The courthouse buzzed like any other Tuesday morning. Fluorescent lights flickered. Lawyers shuffled in with armfuls of folders. A bailiff joked about the vending machine being jammed again. No one noticed the two men pushing a catering cart through the east entrance. No one questioned the clipboard. The uniform? The badge? It all looked official, until you looked too close. Rex did. Inside courtroom 4C, Rachel Morgan sat in a pressed navy blouse, hair pulled back, eyes focused. Her posture was stiff but controlled, the kind of strength people learn in hiding. This was the day she'd testify. Finally, against Rick Vega's crew. Eli wasn't here. He was safe in another city under lockdown protection. That was the deal. Rachel testifies. The system keeps her son breathing. Avery stood near the courtroom door, Rex at her side. He hadn't made a sound all morning, but suddenly, without warning, he shifted. One ear turned. Then his body stiffened. His nose pointed toward the hallway. "What is it, boy?" Avery whispered. Rex growled. Not loud. Not panic. A quiet warning. Avery's hand moved instinctively to her holster. "Stay here," she told the nearest bailiff. "Do not let anyone enter." She moved fast. Rex trotted beside her, low and tight. At the far end of the hallway, two men turned a corner with the cart. One saw her and smiled. Too fast. Too wide. "Hey!" Avery called. "Where's this going?" "Lunch drop for the judge," the first man said, not missing a beat. "Which judge?" "Thornton." Avery didn't blink. "Funny. Thornton's chambers are closed today." The second man froze. Rex didn't wait. With terrifying precision, he lunged, his jaws locking onto the first man's forearm. The man screamed, twisting, dropping the cart. Metal clattered across the floor. The second man bolted. Avery fired one warning shot into the ceiling. "On the ground, now!" The second man hit his knees, hands up. Two bailiffs came sprinting around the corner, weapons drawn. "Secure them!" Avery barked. The cart had no food, no drinks, no napkins. Inside were zip ties, duct tape, a black duffel bag filled with surveillance gear, 2 sets of forged clearance badges, and a photo of Rachel Morgan, printed with today's date written across it in red marker. This wasn't a scare tactic. This was a kill order. Rachel was pulled from the courtroom mid-session and rushed through the service hallway. Avery stayed close, hand on her weapon, Rex leading the way, ears twitching at every sound. They reached the secure transport van parked beneath the courthouse in record time. Inside, Rachel was pale, gripping her seatbelt with white knuckles. "They found me," she whispered. Avery glanced back. "No, they sent amateurs. You're still one step ahead." Rachel looked at Rex. "He's not like other dogs." "No," Avery said. "He's not." Back upstairs, the two men were in custody, stone silent. Neither had IDs. Their fingerprints? Wiped. Their phones? Burner models, already factory reset. It was pro-level damage control. And it wasn't coming from Vega. Later that night, Avery sat with Captain Harris at the precinct, files spread across the table. "Vega's locked up. These guys weren't his usual muscle," Harris said. "This came from above." Avery pulled out a single page, an old email recovered from Rachel's stolen laptop. In it was a reference to an account transfer, routed through a shell non-profit. The signature at the bottom read simply, "C.R. Caleb Ross." "He's not just a tech guy," Avery said. "He's the middleman." "Find him," Harris said. "Bring him in." "I will," Avery replied. She looked down at Rex, who sat by the door, still alert. "We will." That night, Rex paced the floor beside Avery's desk. He didn't lay down, didn't rest. He stood at attention as if waiting for the next threat to knock, because it would, and they both knew it. It was just past midnight when Avery Jensen pulled into the precinct lot. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't feel peaceful, just temporary. She killed the engine, but Rex didn't move from the passenger seat. He stared straight ahead, still alert. "You feel it too, huh?" Avery muttered. Back inside, she went straight to the server room. No waiting, no chain of command. She pulled the access logs for the past 3 months, entry cards, server access, witness protection files. One name came up over and over, Caleb Ross. He hadn't been at the courthouse during the attempted hit. He hadn't checked in for work since the day Rachel was relocated. But his digital fingerprints were all over the case. Movement logs, internal security bypasses, rerouted ID verification, even the form that approved the catering entry. Avery stared at the monitor. He was the one who signed off on the cake that brought the gun into the school. He was the leak. She printed the file and walked it straight to Captain Harris, who was still at his desk, shirt unbuttoned at the collar, tie tossed over the back of his chair. "Tell me this is a joke," he said, flipping through the pages. "It's not. Ross is clean, background solid, commendations, no red flags. That's the point." Avery snapped. "He was built to blend in. We handed him access to the entire witness database. He didn't just leak Rachel's location, he probably leaked others." Harris leaned back, rubbing his temples. "Where is he now?" "Phone's off. No credit card hits. But his badge was used 2 days ago to authorize access to a cabin in Grafton County, an off-the-books location listed as a training site." Avery pushed a map across the desk. "That cabin's not for training. It's a backdoor safe house. He knew no one would check it." Harris paused, then nodded once. "You're not going alone. I'm not going without Rex. Wouldn't expect you to." At dawn, Avery drove into Grafton, the woods heavy with fog and silence. The tires crunched over the frost-covered gravel. Rex sat in the back, quiet but alert, eyes scanning every shadow. They parked a half-mile from the cabin. Avery checked her weapon, adjusted her vest, then gave Rex the signal. He jumped out, nose to the air, posture locked in. They moved fast. When the cabin came into view, there were no lights, no movement, except for a thin stream of smoke rising from the chimney. Avery circled around the side, spotting a silver sedan with government plates half covered in leaves. Rex crept forward, paused, and lifted one paw. Alert. Avery raised her weapon. She kicked the door. Inside, Caleb Ross was sitting at a rickety wooden table with a half-drunk cup of coffee in front of him. He didn't reach for anything. He didn't run. He just looked up and said, "Figured it'd be you." "On your knees, hands behind your head," Avery ordered. Ross complied. "You don't understand," he said. "Oh, I understand perfectly," Avery snapped. "You sold out a woman and her son to traffickers. You orchestrated a hit inside a courthouse. You used your badge to let a loaded weapon inside an elementary school. I didn't know they were going to hurt anyone." Don't give me that, Rex growled low, teeth slightly bared. They said they'd take care of it quietly. Ross continued. No blood, just a relocation. The network helps people vanish. They said Rachel was compromising something bigger. You mean she was threatening their money? They offered me a deal. My sister needed surgery. I didn't have the money. Avery lowered her voice. So you handed over children in exchange for a hospital bill? I didn't think it would go that far, Ross muttered. It always goes that far, she said. Back at the precinct, Ross talked. He spilled everything, not from guilt, but because he knew there was no escape. He named names, gave account numbers, showed them how the network used non-profits to launder funds, how safe houses became traps, how paper trails were forged. Rachel's case was just one of dozens. This goes beyond Vega, Harris said after the interview. We're sitting on a pipeline. Avery didn't say anything. She was in the parking lot, leaning against her cruiser while Rex sat beside her, staring up at the sky like he was waiting for the next move. Rachel had been moved again. This time, no forwarding address, no contact list. Even Avery wasn't told where. And she understood why. Trust came hard now. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Avery opened her locker and found an envelope taped to the inside. No return address. Inside was a drawing. Eli's handwriting. Tell Rex I still remember. Tell him I still feel safe. She stared at the note, then looked down at Rex, who was sitting in the hallway, eyes locked on hers. You earned that, she whispered. He didn't move. He didn't need to. He already knew. The new safe house sat on the edge of a state forest in northern Vermont. A single gravel road led in and out. Surveillance towers, motion-activated floodlights, thermal sensors, every inch was locked down. The federal agents called it the Vault, but Avery didn't trust it. Not anymore. She paced the front hallway while Rex lay by the door, eyes wide open, head low, listening. He hadn't slept since they arrived. Neither had she. Rachel and Eli were back together, under one roof again. For the first time in nearly a year, Eli was sleeping in a bed instead of a cot, his mom only a door away. But Avery knew the silence was a lie. Something about the calm felt staged, manufactured. At 2:13 a.m., the perimeter lights flickered, then the power cut. Rex bolted upright. Avery didn't ask. She was already reaching for her vest, snapping her sidearm into place. Back door, she whispered. Same setup. Zip ties. 2 or 3 of them. Rex growled, deep and sharp. Rachel burst from her room, Eli in her arms, barefoot and shaking. They're here, she said, voice breaking. Go into the panic room, now! Avery ordered, pointing to the reinforced cellar hatch behind the kitchen pantry. Eli clutched Rex's vest as the dog led them toward the basement. He didn't bark. He didn't flinch. He just moved, focused, steady, like he'd done it 1,000 times. Outside, 3 shadows moved across the backyard. Tactical vests, suppressed weapons, night vision gear. They weren't random thugs. These were contractors, hired for one job: erase. Avery crouched behind the dining table, pistol steady, breath low. The first window shattered. Flashbang. She threw herself behind the couch as the room exploded with white light. Glass rained down. Furniture crashed. Rex charged out from the pantry with a snarl that cut through the ringing silence. He slammed into the first man just as he entered, knocking him backward into the hallway wall. The man fired once, wild, but the round went into the ceiling. Avery took the second one. 2 clean shots. Chest, leg. He dropped hard. The third tried to run, but Rex was faster. He hit the guy mid-sprint in the kitchen, locking onto his thigh with terrifying force. The man screamed and crumpled. Avery cuffed him seconds later. It was over in less than a minute. The hallway smelled like gunpowder and blood. Sirens echoed in the distance, late, but coming. Rachel emerged, Eli clutched against her side. "You saved us again," she whispered to Rex. He stood between them and the broken doorway, panting, blood on his fur, unmoving, still watching. By morning, 2 of the intruders were identified, both ex-military. One had a badge that matched a security contractor based out of D.C. No names, just numbers. Disposable. Avery filed the report. Then she shredded a copy. "Someone paid 6 figures for that breach," Marshal Tolan muttered. "And they failed." "They won't stop," Avery said. "Not until Rachel disappears for good, or ends up like the others. She's being moved again. Black site this time. Even we won't know where." Good. Rachel didn't cry this time. She didn't ask to stay. She hugged Avery, kissed Rex's head, and left quietly with Eli asleep on her shoulder. The SUV disappeared into the forest. Rex sat beside Avery at the edge of the driveway, watching the trees. Not relaxed, not proud, just aware. "They were after the boy," she said. Rex looked up. He wasn't a message. He was a target. That truth sat heavy in the air. Because if they were going after kids now, there was no more denying it. This wasn't about Rachel anymore. This was bigger. And Rex knew it. The trial lasted 3 days. Rachel Morgan never stepped foot in the courtroom. She testified via encrypted video link from a location so classified not even Avery was told where. But her voice came through clear. Her words were calm, measured, not shaken, not afraid. And when the prosecution asked her who orchestrated her disappearance, who placed her son in danger, and who had paid to keep her silent, she gave a name. Rick Vega, the same man who tried to slip a loaded handgun inside a child's birthday cake. The jury didn't even blink. They delivered the verdict before lunch. Guilty on all counts. Racketeering, trafficking, attempted murder, child endangerment, federal obstruction, life, no parole. Avery watched the whole thing from the back of the courtroom, Rex lying at her feet like a statue. When the verdict was read, Rex lifted his head, just slightly, like even he understood that something permanent had shifted. Justice, finally, had a name. Outside, reporters crowded the courthouse steps. Microphones, flashes, empty questions. But Avery didn't stop to answer. She walked straight to her cruiser and opened the door. Rex jumped in without hesitation. The second the door shut, the noise disappeared. They sat there for a long moment. "Feels finished," Avery said softly. "But it's not." She turned the key, because something Caleb Ross said still lingered. During his confession, buried beneath self-pity and excuses, he'd mentioned another name. A silent partner, not just someone funding Vega's crew, but helping create the paperwork. Legal guardianship terminations, custody transfers, official stamps, official documents, buried in plain sight. Avery spent the next week diving through every system she could legally, and a few she couldn't. What she found chilled her more than anything before. Over the last 3 years, 37 custody terminations had been filed through a non-profit entity called Marston Family Initiative. On paper, it looked clean, faith-based, grant-backed, focused on youth recovery. But it wasn't clean. 5 of those kids were still missing. One name on the advisory board, Judge Lowell Haynes. He had signed Rachel's original custody revocation. He was also one of the names Rachel had written down in her notes back at the cabin. It wasn't over. That night, Avery met with Harris at the station. She laid out everything, Documents, signatures, wire transfers, time stamps. "This is bigger than Vega," she said. "This is systemic. The cake was just the surface." Harris leaned back in his chair, eyes tight. "You're saying a sitting judge is running cover for a child trafficking ring?" "I'm saying he's laundering legitimacy," Avery said. "He's making it all look legal, and he's got friends. And you're not letting this go." Avery didn't respond. She didn't have to. Rex stood by the door, tail still, eyes locked on hers. Harris nodded. "Then take it to the task force. Start the fire." Later that week, Avery drove north, into the edge of another county, toward a rural trailer park listed in a closed file from the Marston records. The name on the file was Marley Ray Winters, age 8, missing for over a year. Case marked custody surrendered by maternal guardian, though no court ever confirmed that hearing took place. Avery stepped out of the cruiser. Rex followed. They approached the crumbling trailer. No noise, no movement. But Rex's ears twitched. Then he sat and waited. Avery knocked once. "Marley, my name is Avery. I'm here with Rex. We're here to help." Silence. Then a whisper through the door. "Is he the dog from the cake?" Avery swallowed hard. "Yes," she said. "He's the one." The door creaked open. A little girl stood there, skinny, bruised knees, oversized sweatshirt hanging off one shoulder, but her eyes were steady, sharp. She didn't reach for Avery. She reached for Rex. He stepped forward and let her wrap both arms around his neck like she'd been waiting for him her whole life. Later, at the station, Marley wouldn't speak to anyone but Avery. She wouldn't sit near the social worker. She wouldn't look at the therapists. But she sat beside Rex and traced her finger over his badge. "My mom's not dead," she said. Avery leaned in. "What's her name?" "Grace," Marley whispered. "Grace Winters. She didn't leave me. They made her go." That night, Avery dug up everything on Grace Winters. And just like Rachel, she had filed a police report. Just like Rachel, she'd vanished after the system labeled her unstable. Just like Rachel, she was listed as having relinquished rights. But Avery didn't believe that for a second, because Marley had found Rex, and Rex had never been wrong. The clinic sat at the edge of Roanoke County, one of those roadside buildings you'd miss if you blinked. White paint peeled from the siding, and a faded open sign buzzed weakly in the window. It was the kind of place people went when they had nowhere else to go, or when they didn't want to be found. Avery pulled into the lot slowly. She didn't need Jeep to know this was it. The nurse who called had been vague, just enough to keep plausible deniability, but clear enough for someone like Avery to read between the lines. "She gave a false name," the nurse had whispered over the line. "But when I showed her Marley's picture, she cried like she'd been holding it in for a lifetime." Inside, a woman sat wrapped in a blanket, one arm in a makeshift sling. Her eyes were swollen, her cheek bruised, but her spine was straight. Grace Winters. Avery entered slowly, Rex trotting quietly at her side. Grace's gaze fell on the dog first. She froze. "Marley?" she asked, barely audible. "She's safe," Avery said. "She's with Protective Services. She's asking about you." Grace's shoulders crumpled. Her breath hitched, but no tears came. Just a slow collapse inward, like her bones had finally let go. "They told me she was gone," she said, voice cracked from months of silence. "Said I wasn't stable. Said she'd be better off without me." "Who told you?" "Some caseworker I'd never met. Showed up with documents I never signed. They said it was over. that it was best I leave before I made things worse. I didn't know who to trust, so I ran. Avery sat across from her. You weren't crazy. They used the same playbook with Rachel Morgan, and probably more mothers we'll never meet. Grace looked at Rex, who was sitting perfectly still, eyes fixed on hers. That's the dog, she said quietly. The one from the story. The one Marley kept drawing in her notebook. He's not just a dog, Avery said. He's the reason this entire network is starting to crack. By evening, DNA confirmed the match. Grace was Marley's biological mother. The forged documents were being unraveled, and the judge who approved them, Lowell Haynes, was suddenly on vacation. But Avery didn't wait for permission. She brought Grace to the safe visitation center that same night. She gave the staff one instruction: let Rex in first. Marley sat at the far end of the playroom, hugging a stuffed animal shaped like a German shepherd. When Rex entered, she dropped it instantly and ran to him, burying her face in his fur. Then she looked up. Standing in the doorway was her mother. Marley didn't move at first. She stared. And then she ran again, into Grace's arms this time, wrapping around her like she might disappear if she let go. No one spoke. There were no grand speeches, just breathless sobs and quiet apologies whispered into hair and skin, and the space between two broken lives reconnecting. Avery turned away, giving them privacy. Rex didn't. He stood just far enough to give space, but close enough to guard the moment. Later, outside the center, Grace leaned against the railing, looking up at the night sky. I used to pray for a sign, she said. A signal that someone was still looking. I didn't think it had come with 4 legs. Avery smiled. Sometimes the right ones don't talk. They just find you. Inside, Marley had fallen asleep beside Rex on the floor, one hand resting on his back. Grace watched through the glass. I don't know how to say thank you. You don't have to, Avery said. But if you want to help, we need your testimony. Everything you know. Names, paper trails, how they made you disappear. Grace nodded. You'll have it. Good, because this doesn't end with Vega or Haynes. They're just the middlemen. There's still someone above them, the one who built this. The wind picked up across the parking lot, rustling the trees. Rex lifted his head and looked into the darkness. Always watching, always listening. Because even after all the reunions, all the rescues, and all the cracks in the system, they weren't done yet. The worst was still hiding in plain sight. The sun was just starting to rise over the quiet town of Brookstone when Avery Jensen stepped out of the precinct for the last time that week. Her shift was over, but her mind hadn't slowed down in days. In her hand was a worn manila folder, Grace Winter's full statement. Inside, it connected everything. Non-profit shell companies, forged custody records, and one name that had appeared again and again in sealed financial disclosures. Senator Dwight Langston. Clean image, family man, champion of youth programs. Also, the silent investor behind the Marston Family Initiative, the man who had kept it all running behind polished speeches and closed-door meetings. That file was now in the hands of a federal task force. But Avery knew what the headlines wouldn't show. It wasn't the agents who cracked the case, or the subpoenas. It was a boy who didn't eat his cake. It was a girl who whispered the truth into a dog's ear. It was Rex. Outside the courthouse later that week, reporters swarmed again. Cameras, microphones, questions. Is the investigation officially closed? Will there be charges against public officials? What role did the K-9 play? Avery stepped up to the podium only once. She didn't say much, just enough. Without Rex, none of this would have come to light. He didn't just detect a weapon. He uncovered a network that preyed on silence. He gave children the one thing no system ever guaranteed: someone who listened. The crowd fell still. Behind her, Rex sat tall, eyes steady, tail still. 2 months later, in a small park just outside the city, a modest ceremony took place. No big fanfare, no parades, just the people who mattered. Rachel and Eli stood near a new tree planted in the corner, a wooden plaque at its base that read, "For Rex, who saw what others ignored." Avery spotted Grace and Marley sitting on the grass nearby. Marley held a sketchpad and was drawing. Rex, of course. He was lying beside her, tongue out, tail thumping softly each time she giggled. She had healed. Not all at once, but enough. Eli approached Avery and handed her a small envelope. "I made this," he said, "for your office." Inside was a photo, a crayon drawing of Rex standing between 2 kids. 1 girl, 1 boy. The dog wore a superhero cape. Above it, scrawled in shaky handwriting, "He didn't bark. He protected." Avery blinked back something sharp in her chest. "Thank you," she said. "No, thank him," Eli whispered, turning to Rex. The dog sat beside Avery, calm, as always, as if none of it fazed him. But when Eli reached down and scratched behind his ear, Rex leaned in, eyes soft. He knew. That night, Avery drove out past the ridge, along their usual trail. Just her and Rex. No radio, no noise. She tossed a stick once, and for a moment he became just a dog again, chasing, running, tail flying. When he returned, she knelt beside him. "You changed everything. You know that?" Rex tilted his head. "You didn't just stop a gun in a cake. You stopped something darker, and you did it with 0 words. Just instinct." She reached into her jacket and pulled out her phone. Facing the camera, she clicked record. "If you've followed Rex's story, if you've seen what one dog's loyalty can uncover, help us keep telling these stories. Help us protect the voiceless, the forgotten, the almost lost. Because somewhere out there, another kid needs someone like Rex." She smiled down at him. "Subscribe to German Shepherd. Share this story. And maybe tell us your own." She looked into the camera one last time. "What's your story with a loyal dog?" Then she ended the recording. Beside her, Rex rested his head on her knee. Quiet, unshaken, unmistakably a hero.